Raising his head high in the air, he made my eardrums ring with his deep voice. I could hear the underbrush popping as he ran to join her. I couldn't figure out what had taken place. Surely Little Ann had heard or seen something. I could tell by their voices that whatever it was they were after, they were close enough to see it and probably running by sight. The animal left the bottoms and headed for the mountains. Whatever it was, it must have realized my dogs were crowding it too closely. At the edge of the foothills, it turned and came back towards the river. I was trying to figure out what was going on when I realized that on striking the river, the animal had again turned and was coming straight towards me. I set my lantern down and tightened my grip on the axe. I was standing my ground quite well when visions of bears, lions, and all kinds of other animals started flashing across my mind. I jumped behind a big sycamore and was trying to press my body into the tree when a big coon came tearing by. 25 yards behind him came my dogs, running side by side. I saw them clearly when they passed me, bawling every time their feet touched the ground. After seeing that there was nothing to be scared of, once again I was the fearless hunter, screaming and yelling as loud as I could, "Get him, boy! Get him!" I tore out after them. The trails I knew so well were forgotten. I took off straight through the brush. I was tearing my way through some elders when the voices of my dogs stopped. Holding my breath, I stood and waited. Then it came. The long, drawn-out bawl of the tree bark. My little hounds had done it. They had treed their first coon. When I came to them and saw what they had done, I was speechless. I groaned and closed my eyes. I didn't want to believe it. There was a lot of big sycamores in the bottoms, but the one in which my dogs had tread was the giant of them all. While prowling the woods, I had seen the big tree many times. I had always stopped and admired it. Like a king in his own domain, it towered far above the smaller trees. It had taken me quite a while to find a name suitable for the big sycamore. For a while I had called it the chicken tree. In some ways it had reminded me of a mother hen, hovering over her young in a rainstorm. Its huge limbs spread out over the small birch, ash, box elder, and water oak as if it alone were their protector. Next I named it the Giant. That name didn't last long. Mama told us children a story about a big giant that lived in the mountains and ate little children that were lost. Right away I started looking for another name. One day while lying in the warm sun staring at its magnificent beauty, I found the perfect name. From that day on it was the Big Tree. I named the bottoms around it the Big Tree Bottoms. Walking around it and using the moon as a light, I started looking for the coon. High up in the top, I saw a hollow in the end of a broken limb. I figured that was the coon's den. I could climb almost any tree I had ever seen, but I knew I could never climb the big sycamore and it would take days to chop it down. There had been very little hope from the beginning, but on seeing the hollow I gave up. "Come on," I said to my dogs. "There's nothing I can do. We'll go someplace else and find another coon." I turned to walk away. My hounds made no move to follow. They started whining. Old Dan reared up, placed his front paws on the trunk, and started bawling. "I know he's up there," I said, "but there's nothing I can do. I can't climb it. Why, it's 60 feet up to the first limb, and it would take me a month to cut it down." Again I turned and started on my way. Little Ann came to me. She reared up and started licking my hands. Swallowing the knot in my throat, I said, "I'm sorry, little girl. I want him just as badly as you do, but there's no way I can get him." She ran back to the tree and started digging in the soft ground close to the roots. "Come on now," I said in a gruff voice. "You're both acting silly. You know I'd get the coon for you if I could, but I can't." With a whipped dog look on her face and with her tail between her legs, Little Ann came over. She wouldn't even look at me. Old Dan walked slowly around behind the tree and hid himself. He peeped around the big trunk and looked at me. The message I read in his friendly eyes tore at my heart. He seemed to be saying, "You told us to put one in a tree and you would do the rest." With tears in my eyes, I looked again at the big sycamore. A wave of anger came over me. Gritting my teeth, I said, "I don't care how big you are. I'm not going to let my dogs down. I told them if they put a coon in a tree, I would do the rest, and I'm going to. I'm going to cut you down. I don't care if it takes me a whole year." I walked over and sank my axe as deep as I could into the smooth white bark. My dogs threw a fit. Little Ann started turning in circles. I could hear her pleased whimpering cry. Old Dan bawled and started gnawing on the big tree's trunk. At first it was easy. My axe was sharp and the chips flew. 2 hours later, things were different. My arms felt like 2 dead grapevines, and my back felt like someone had pulled a plug out of one end and it drained all the sap out. While taking a breather, I saw I was making more progress than I thought I would. The cut I had started was a foot deep, but I still had a long way to go. Sitting on their ears, my dogs waited and watched. I smiled at the look on their faces. Every time I stopped chopping, they would come over. While Little Ann washed the sweat from my face, Old Dan would inspect my work. He seemed to be pleased with what he saw, for he always wagged his tail. Along about daylight, I got my second wind, and I really made the chips fly. This burst of energy cost me dearly. By sunup, I was so stiff I could hardly move. My hands and arms were numb. My back screamed with pain. I could go no further. Sitting down, I leaned back against the tree and fell asleep. Little Ann woke me up by washing my face. I groaned with the torture of getting to my feet. Every muscle in my body seemed to be tied in a knot. I was thinking of going down to the river to wash my face in the cool water when I heard a loud whoop. I recognized my father's voice. I whooped to let him know where I was. Papa was riding our red mule. After he rode up, he just sat there and looked me over. He glanced at my dogs and at the big sycamore. I saw the worry leave his face. He straightened his shoulders, pursed his lips, and blew out a little air. He reminded me of someone who had just dropped a heavy load. In a slow, calm voice, he said, "Are you all right, Billy?" "Yes, Papa," I said. "I'm a little tired and sleepy, otherwise I'm fine." He slid from the mule's back and came over. "Your mother's worried," he said. "When you didn't come in, we didn't know what had happened. You should have come home." I didn't know what to say. I bowed my head and looked at the ground. I was trying hard to choke back the tears when I felt his hand on my shoulder. "I'm not scolding," he said. "We just thought maybe you had an accident or something." I looked up and saw a smile on his face. He turned and looked again at the tree. "Say," he said, "this is the tall sycamore you call the big tree, isn't it?" I nodded my head. "Is there a coon in it?" he asked. "There sure is, Pop," I said. "He's in the hollow limb. See the one way up there? That's why I couldn't come home. I was afraid he'd get away." "Maybe you just think he's there," Papa said. "I believe I'd make sure before I'd cut down a tree that big." "Oh, he's there all right," I said. "My dogs weren't 10 feet behind him when he went up." "Why are you so determined to get this tune?" Papa asked. "Couldn't you go somewhere else and tree one? Maybe the tree would be a smaller one." "I thought about that, Papa," I said, "but I made a bargain with my dogs. I told them that if they put one in a tree, I'd do the rest. Well, they fulfilled their part of the bargain. Now it's up for me to do my part, and I'm going to, Papa. I'm going to cut it down. I don't care if it takes me a year." Papa laughed and said, "Oh, I don't think it'll take that long, but it will take a while. I'll tell you what I'll do. You take the mule and go get some breakfast. I'll chop it until you get back." "No, Papa," I said, "I don't want any help. I want to cut it down all by myself. You see, if someone helps me, I wouldn't feel like I kept my part of the agreement." An astonished look came over my father's face. "Why, Billy," he said, "you can't stay down here without anything to eat and no sleep. Besides, it'll take at least 2 days to cut that tree down, and that's hard work." "Please, Papa," I begged, "don't make me quick. I just have to get that coon. If I don't, my dogs won't ever believe in me again." Papa didn't know what to tell me. He scratched his head, looked over to my dogs and back at me. He started walking around. I waited for him to make up his mind. He finally reached a decision. "Well, all right," he said, "if that's the way you want it. I'm for it even if it is only an agreement between you and your dogs. If a man's word isn't any good, he's no good himself. Now I have to get back and tell your mother what you're all right. It's a cinch that you can't do that kind of work on an empty stomach, so I'll send your oldest sister down with a lunch bucket. With tears in my eyes, I said, "Tell Mama I'm sorry for not coming home last night." "Don't you worry about your mother," he said as he climbed on the mule's back. "I'll take care of her. Another thing, I'll have to make a trip to the store today, and I'll talk this over with your grandfather. He may be able to help some way." After Papa left, things were a little different. The tree didn't look as big. My axe wasn't as heavy. I even managed to sing a little as I chopped away. When my sister came with the lunch bucket, I could have kissed her, but I didn't. She took one look at the big tree, and her blue eyes got as big as a guinea's egg. "You're crazy," she gasped. "Absolutely crazy. Why, it'll take a month to cut that tree down. And all for an old coon." I was so busy with the fresh side pork, fried eggs, and hot biscuits I didn't pay much attention to her. After all, she was a girl, and girls don't think like boys do. She raved on. "You can't possibly cut it down today. And what are you going to do when it gets dark?" "I'm going to keep right on chopping," I said. "I stayed with it last night, didn't I? Well, I'll stay till it's cut down. I don't care how long it takes." My sister got upset. She looked at me, threw back her small head, and looked up to the top of the big sycamore. "You're as crazy as a bedbug," she said. "Why, I never heard of such a thing." She stepped over in front of me and very seriously asked if she could look in my eyes. "Look in my eyes," I said. "What do you want to do that for? I'm not sick." "Yes, you are, Billy," she said. "Very sick. Mama said when old man Johnson went crazy, his eyes turned green. I want to see if yours have." This was too much. "If you don't get out of here," I shouted, "you're going to be red instead of green, and I mean that." I grabbed up a stick and started towards her. Of course, I wouldn't have hit her or anything. This scared her, and she started for the house. I heard her saying something about an old coon as she disappeared in the underbrush. Down the bottom of my lunch bucket, I found a neat little package of scraps for my dogs. While they were eating, I walked down to a spring and filled the bucket with cool water. The food did wonders for me. My strength came back. I spit on my hands and, whistling a coon hunter's tune, I started making the chips fly. The cut grew so big I could have laid down in it. I moved over to another side and started a new one. Once while I was taking a rest, old Dan came over to inspect my work. He hopped up in the cut and sniffed around. "You'd better get out of there," I said. "If that tree takes a notion to fall, it'll mash you flatter than a tadpole's tail." With a no-care look on his friendly face, he gave me a hurry-up signal and a wag of his tail. Little Ann had dug a bed in a pile of dead leaves. She looked as if she were asleep, but I knew she wasn't. Every time I stopped swinging